Good morning,
Mid
hospitality.
mid sip of Biscayne Bay coffee.
Mid sip, Biscayne Bay Coffee. Get your coffee for 10% off at biscaynebaycoffee.com. Use
Jumping
code
straight
good
into
morning.
the sponsors this morning. Yeah, it's
Listen,
we've talked a lot on this show about the woes of travel lately, and I had skated scot free for a while until yesterday. So woke up in
did
the
you
countryside of Edinburgh or countryside of Scotland, flew out of Edinburgh 4 hours late, missed my connection, got
mm,
home, got in bed around 1 a.m. I was supposed to get home around 6. So yeah, the travel bug or issues caught up to me.
I was gonna say we talked about it enough. It was just bound to happen. That's the thing. It was just bound to happen.
Yeah, and hey, I'm glad it wasn't canceled or anything like that. So,
Yeah,
um,
that's true.
Steve Turk, thanks for the coffee this morning. Needed today more than any other show I've done. Maybe last week. Last week was pretty rough.
last week was pretty rough. We actually got a couple comments, but no big deal. Um, I'm actually excited for this one because this is actually a topic we've covered in the past, and obviously, I think Storied is a great example of why branding is a bigger topic for us. I would say. I think we go into the discussion of big brand, little brand, no brand, often, and so this is something that we always like to refer back to. And cheers to you, Steve Turk, again for Biscayne Bay Coffee. Um, I'm excited. So before we jump in, I think it's good to highlight kind of the spark behind this topic, just because again we've talked about it before, but seeing the recent data, normally we don't pull like a Skift article or anything, but Skift came up with a report on hotels versus short-term rentals on branding, on how kind of they stack against each other. And it was really interesting because it's proven the points that we've said before on the show. But I also think, with other articles that we've seen, with like, let's say through FocusWire, short-term rental demand hits high levels in US. And then of course Altito is seeing the same thing rebound in Europe. So for us to see travel rebound in this sector, um, especially a sector that is not very well branded outside of, as we were talking about earlier, Airbnb, it's pretty interesting to see. So
Yeah, I mean, at the end of
um,
the day, travel is resilient through every downturn, through every major global catastrophe. Travel always returns. It's not a
yeah.
fad. It's similar to medicine that people always need it. They have to have it.
Mhm.
So yeah, jumping into this Skift research that was posted, it's highlighting the things that we already know, and there's so much to digest from this very obvious visual, but we can cut it and we'll cut it in a few different ways. But let's start on the short-term rental side. 85% of short-term rentals are owned or operated by mom and pops. So that accounts for 7.5 million of the roughly 8 million, 8.5 million total properties on Airbnb. And what that means, though, a lot of these properties aren't actually live and bookable 365 days a year.
Mhm.
So I bet, if we took a fine tooth comb through Airbnb's earnings this quarter or Q2, my guess is probably inversely would be true. 85% of their revenues are coming from that 15% of professional operators.
Mhm.
Um, I'd be almost willing to bet my house on it. And it's something we don't see in hotels. I feel like, and sure, I'm going to be biased on this because I'm starting a hotel collection, but I feel like there's a lot of tailwinds for travelers not wanting to stay in a branded Marriott, branded Hilton, branded IHG, or whatever. They want
Mhm.
to stay in boutiques or places that have a story, or they're unique. They've got a cool restaurant or cocktail bar, or whatever. It's a lot different than short-term rentals, and you can tell consistency a little bit easier from an independent hotel than you can from an independent short-term rental.
Hmm. Well, I was gonna say the comment you made to me before we jumped on the recording was, for us, I think it's really easy, and probably anyone watching, um, you know, that's a weird statement to think about. I think when you on the short term rental side, because we know the brands, you and I know the Sextants, the Altitos, the X, Y, and
Casa,
Z, the
Sonder, yeah.
Vacasa, Sonder, all these companies. But to a consumer, you know, facing side, like you said, if I asked my roommate, if I asked my parents, if I asked anybody who travels, more likely they're not going to really know a vacation rental brand off the top of their head. Um,
No,
so
not a
that
chance.
just, yeah.
I'd be willing to bet my house on that one too. You walk down the street and ask 10 people if they've heard of Vacasa. You'd be lucky if one of them has. Uh, Jamie from
Yeah.
AirDNA, 20% of Airbnb's revenues come from professional operators. Is that it?
Yeah. Wow.
Is
Interesting.
that it? Well,
I
I
think
would
we
have
need to
lost the house, Jamie.
I think we need to get Jamie on the show to cover some of these numbers, because obviously this is something he's very well embedded in. I'm going to send him a link, actually, see if he'll join us you know, last minute. But I actually am shocked because, Michael, I don't have a extra bed for you to come live on. So I'm sorry. You're going to have to be
I mean,
on your own.
there's I would love to pick some of that data apart with Jamie. There's lots of properties that are listed that never open calendar availability, um, or they're only open for a special event that comes to town. So I'm very curious on where the breakdown of professional line is, Jamie. So if you're still listening, we'd love to have it cut by a professional.
Yeah.
Um, so to your point though, the brand, like you can have 3 or 4 properties in the hotel world and people know you. Like Ace
Mhm.
Hotels, I don't have it in front
Good
of me, but
example.
I think they have 5 properties. But people know the brand Ace. So I think we're in a period that Airbnb is the brand
Mhm.
for better or worse, right?
Yeah.
And that brand does not come with standards. And that's kind of the challenge that we all face as short-term rental operators to figure out what what
Well,
we do.
I was gonna say the chat's going wild right now on LinkedIn, so this is cool to see. But the question from Jeff from Host GPO is, what is a professional operator? And I think you just kind of
The
said the word.
data,
I think,
well, the data that Skift shared, they're calling professional operators 20 units or more. So
yeah.
85% of the market comes from people who operate 19 or fewer. Um, I mean, I believe that in terms of the breakdown of ownership and operating, but I'd love to chat with Jamie and understand the perspective of how that is actually holds with percent of revenue as well.
Yeah. Well, Jamie just messaged back, asked him to join the show. He's in a car right now, so
Ah, okay, we'll
unfortunately,
get him on soon, Jamie.
I'd say, Jamie, for you, we'll accept any type of video, audio quality decrease because you're the man with the numbers. So just know that that offer still stands. But we want you to drive safe, so don't talk and drive at the same time. Um, but like also, I think when okay, so we're talking about a brand or a professional operator. I think professionals. There's a difference between a host who has 1 to 2, maybe 5 to 10. I would consider a professional operator anyone that implements a brand standard inside all of their properties as much as possible. Granted, not every property or home is going to be the same. The destinations are going to be more spread out, but Jeff, your company is a great example on how people do that. They get with Host GPO, they create a linen standard, a amenity standard, a X, Y, and Z standard on what they're going to have inside all their properties to keep things consistent through messaging, through any of their other things that they're doing with guest and owner facing tasks. So for me, that's where I see, there's a difference between a host to a big, not even a big, a professional operator, someone who brings in real standardization with keeping the customization of like that short-term rental feel, right? You want to feel like you're in a home, not a hotel, but you have those comfortabilities that everyone's used to. Um, that's just my thing. Andy Medic, can we define professionalism by standards and not necessarily numbers of properties? There's not even a standard on what's considered a bed.
Yeah, this is another challenge with the space, Andy. Like if you look at data across all the companies that put it out, everyone kind of defines it a little bit differently. 5 properties or more is professional, 10 or more is professional. This Skift article was 20 or more is professional. But I agree, Andy. I've been in air quotes professional rentals that are pretty terrible, and I've been in properties that are just managed by one person and that's their only property, and they're absolutely fantastic. At one point in Airbnb's life cycle, you can almost guarantee staying with someone that only managed one property was going to be a better experience than someone who managed 20, 50, 100. A lot more of a personal touch and attention to detail, and really a more professional feel. There were things that would lack, like instant communications or even door locks, right? Automated door locks versus just getting a key.
Yeah. Home tech.
When I hosted my property a few years ago, I would actually meet them at the door, give them the key, and I could, you just kind of make sure that they're not showing up with 100 people and they're gonna, haul in a keg in. So, yeah. Jeff, should STR World start counting by keys instead of homes? I know Transparent used to cut some data by numbers of rooms, not numbers of properties. And those types of comparisons are good when you're comparing with hotels. I don't know how that's going to necessarily help us cutting data on numbers of rooms managed by professionals or not. But it definitely leads to some interesting data in direct comparison with short-term rentals and hotels. I've just gotten back from Scotland, where I was on a hotel tour across the country, really. And it's amazing. Every property, they were all independents, and you could definitely feel it. Some were absolutely buttoned up, 5-star premier luxury, and others, they were part of a small collection that was owned by someone who didn't live in the country, and there just wasn't a whole lot of oversight. And so you see like the lack of standards across hotels is also evident in the independent section, especially. You may or may not have coffee in your room. You may or may not have an iron in your room in some of these properties. So it's not something unique to the short-term rental operators, the challenges and struggles of independent operations. Being part of a branded group or a collection can help, because people can know that stamp of approval is on the property. That's just something that doesn't exist to any large extent in short-term rentals. I'd say the closest collection that I could identify would be Marriott, because they have a set of standards to have the properties list on Marriott. I can't think of too many more off the top of my head. I am heavily sleep deprived today, so apologies. But I have a lot of listeners, so somebody can correct me.
No, I was gonna say that I love the live engagement. This is really fun for me. I would rather have this than you and I just chatting all day by ourselves. So it's nice to see the comments and questions. But I'm also kind of like, I think as I'm hearing your thoughts, Michael, and just seeing the comments come in, for me, even when I was a hotel manager of an independent boutique, or when I did start off with Marriott's Autograph Collection, which is independent owned, operated property, but still has the flag and brand standards. I think consistency is still going to be the key. And even the big brands, a 716 unit hotel to a 70 unit condominium hotel, that for me was basically 70 short-term rentals in one building. It was a multifamily hotel basically, or multifamily apartment, condo, hotel, whatever you want to kind of phrase it as. And the thing is, whether it had the stamp of approval from Marriott or if it was a smaller property with less unit count, consistency still sets a tone for the guest on what they can expect, what's professional, what's not professional. So I think it's really hard. It comes down to consistency of the standards. I think I've seen a lot of properties that are part of like IHG or Choice or whatever, and they don't keep it consistent because there's no one really, even though there's a brand, even though I know what to expect with a Holiday Inn versus whatever, um, it has to actually be executed on the property. And sometimes the property level itself can be a little bit more lax, which makes the inconsistency happen because you can have one property that's super on top of it and make sure they hit all their check marks and cross their T's, dot their I's, compared to the other property that doesn't. It's still consistency lacking. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and since Jamie's commented, want to touch on some AirDNA data that was put out, I guess today. Wow.
You say if you
On
if you have the link, send it my way for the live viewers that we got on right now.
yeah, here we go.
Thank you.
So we're definitely in the recovery phase for cities. The past 2 years, we've seen the majority of travel go towards destinations, not urban markets. That number is trending upwards. We're still down pretty significantly from 2019 levels. It looks like as of the most recent data, we're down 21% of 2019 levels. Whereas we've surpassed it in suburban areas, up 10%, 10.8%. So the trend lines are going the right direction. For the people who are only exposed to urban markets like a Sonder are definitely feeling it, but their trend lines are good and the narrative is going the right direction. One more point, just anecdote, and maybe Jamie has some data on this. A lot of people that I chatted with throughout the travels last week, they used Airbnb a while, but it seems like there's a bit of a resurgence back into hotels. And I think people were citing fees as one of them. It's just gotten too expensive to stay. And then personally, like you can't just, it almost never makes sense to book a short-term rental for one night with the cleaning fee, especially. So anybody who's doing one night stints is going to stay in a hotel because it's easier and it's cheaper. So I'm very curious, Jamie, to find out data on trend lines of stays moving back in the direction of hotels, or is travel just going haywire right now and everybody's winning?
Well, I'm curious because I've been thinking about this a lot. And I think we've talked about it before on the show, if not privately, we've talked about it. But I want to see, because I think we talked 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago on the show about how the traveler itself or themselves are fighting against, like, they're done with Airbnb in a lot of ways. I've heard so many people say, I'm tired of having this like outrageous cleaning fee with this amount of chore lists to do upon checkout. If I'm paying a $300 cleaning fee or $150 cleaning fee, why am I expected to do all these things before I leave? And so the big thing I'm seeing is that if the traveler eventually gets away from short-term rentals, or at least short-term rental platforms like Airbnb and Vrbo, you know, as operators, the question I think comes down to, I think we all know that fees suck. I want to see my nightly rate and what I'm going to pay total after tax. That's what I want to see. I don't want to see a amenity resort fee for
In
being in
some
a
countries, they're required by law to show that number, but not in the US.
yeah.
So I 100% agree. But I also think part of it's
Well,
the
I wasn't
standardization.
I wasn't done though because I wanted to see. Do you think my question really is? Do our operators going to embed their cleaning fee or cleaning costs into the nightly rate to start getting the overall traveler to stop freaking out about all these extra fees and actually make it more of a mental game when it comes to the purchase of the vacation or the stay?
It's a good question. I think the platforms would have to force that to happen for operators too,
Mhm.
because just the way the revenues flow in short-term rentals is different than in hotels. Most hotels have cleaners on staff. Most short-term rentals don't. And short-term rentals don't want to count it as revenue because if they did, then they'd have to share that with the owner.
Mhm.
Uh, so it is cleaner to have them separated. Now, is that what the consumer wants? No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So there's a predicament that we're in. Do you cater towards the owners that are the ones that you can't have any revenue coming in the door without them, or
Yeah.
guests who you can't have any revenue coming in the door without them? So
Well,
that's
I've
the challenges of the marketplace.
yeah. As an operator myself, though, I've seen whether whatever property management software you're using, we've like embedded safely into our nightly rate. And once we get the payout, it still shows it separated. But to the guests, they when they're booking, they don't see an extra fee. So thinking if Airbnb can do that for a damaged waiver, right? Like that's pretty much what we're putting into our property management software, which pushes to Airbnb, which increases the nightly rate based off of the fee divided by the nights. Um, to me, if they can do that, then a cleaning fee, obviously is a bigger chunk of change than a damage waiver from Safely. But I don't know. I just think,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
definitely doable. It's
yeah,
absolutely doable. Um, I also think they may not want to hide the cleaning fee in just because they're usually so darn expensive. You know, if you're
mhm,
going somewhere for one night and there's a $150 cleaning fee, you could stay at a hotel for $185. Then
or
it's a
less.
no brainer.
Yeah,
But that's where this kind of arc of where it makes sense to stay. Uh, if you're in a short term rental for 4 nights, it's a little bit different than if you're there for one night. So we've always seen longer length of stays in short term rentals, and that's one of the reasons. The second is if you have a family or friends, you want your own space. If it's 4 nights, but if it's just one night, you can kind of suck it up and get through it.
for
But
sure.
yeah, a lot to unpack on this show. I think it'd be great to get Jamie in because I'm a bit flabbergasted at the Airbnb's 20% of their revenues only is from professional operators. So curious how AirDNA describes professional operator,
Yeah.
um, and then I'd love to dive deeper on that number because the 80/20 rule I would have assumed held true. So
Yeah. Well,
join us, Jamie.
good thing you didn't lose your house, but good. I was gonna say, Jamie is gonna join. He says he's available, so I sent him a link. So once we uh, get him through onto the channel, we'll be good to go and dive into those numbers. But we do have one question from Andy again. What's your opinion on bundling operating cost fees such as cleaning into nightly rate relative to the hotel? Around drip fees, extra cleaning fees, resort fees. Do we need to be careful on bundling? I think, yeah, there's a couple things we could go into that, which we kind of already did. But before we
Yeah, I mean,
keep,
I would. flip that back to you, Andy. If you're traveling and staying in a property, would you rather see this fee, that fee, another fee, or it all just kind of bundled in? For me,
Yeah.
when I check into a resort hotel and there's a $15 resort fee, but I'm there for work, I'm not going to the pool, I'm not going to the gym, I'm not using their amenities. I always ask, I don't want the resort fee because I'm not using the pool.
Yeah.
The answer is it's always built in there anyway. You can't really get rid of it. But what am I getting for that extra money? What am I getting for this fee, that fee, the other fee?
Yeah.
People don't like being feed to death. It's frustrating as a traveler, as a guest. So my inclination would be to bundle it all together. Now, if there's a legit resort fee because your property is in a community that forces you to have a $10 a stay fee, fine, pass that on, explain it to the guests why it's there. But if it's just fee, and there's no explanation, my guess is someone who's in a very similar boat can get the booking, and you probably won't.
Yeah, agreed. Well, without further ado, we have our new and good friend Jamie Lane joining us from AirDNA. Welcome to the podcast, Jamie.
Hey.
How are you doing, my man?
Good. Thanks for having me. It was funny
Of
listening
course.
in. You guys talking about the data. I thought I'd chime in.
No, we need it. We need it.
I was gonna seriously. I was like, we're not data analysts and experts like you, so it makes sense to have you join, especially with that comment. You got us off guard. So let's jump in. Can you like explain what you guys have really discovered from this report, and what do you guys consider a professional manager? That's what I want to know too.
Yeah, I mean, we've got quite a different ways that we track it in the Skift report, and we just like in our standard report, we break it out like 1 unit hosts, 2 to 5 unit hosts, 5 to 20, 21 plus, and they sort of pulled out the 21 plus as a professional. We also track it by sort of management company. So how many units does Vacasa have versus Sonder versus any of these other companies? So we break it down quite a few different ways. But even like in that 21 unit plus, like only about probably less than half, and can you get like a branded name associated with it? So even when you look at it that way, like it gets to be a pretty small percent of the overall pie. And what like floored me in the data is just how much is still dominated by people with just 1 unit. So when we think about like Airbnb's like inventory, and they've got over 6 million active units, like almost 2.5 million of those are people with just 1 unit. Like,
damn.
So let's pause there, Jamie.
Yeah.
And you and I have spoken about this briefly in the past on the 2.5 that just have 1 unit.
Mm-hmm.
How many of those are actually active? Like how many of those can you book 300 nights a year or more?
It depends. Well, 300 nights a year, like that becomes interesting in different markets, right? If you're in Cape Cod and you've got the Hamptons, like you're only renting out 120 nights a year anyway because of the seasonality. Sure. And so much of the industry is very seasonal, especially when you start looking at Europe, when like 3/4 of the revenue is generated during just 3 months of the summer. Like looking at just like units that are available full time really pulls back a lot of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I guess what I'm trying to parse together is how many listings are available for an event here and there versus like available year round, but they may only get booked 100 nights.
Yeah. And the thing that we look at for that is how many are available in any given month, how many nights are available, how many properties have availability in that month. So for the 1 unit host of the is roughly 2.3 million. Like in June, 1.7 million of those had availability in June. or had a booking in June.
Okay. So a pretty good chunk.
Yeah.
Interesting. And we'd love some data on the hotel versus short-term rental trends too. Do you have anything on that?
Yeah, so I'm actually in the middle of a big study we're doing with STR, with Smith Travel Research, that we're going to release in a month. So it's going out at the Hotel Data Conference in Nashville, which is for data nerds, like one of the holy grails of conferences. And it just matches up that it's the same week as DARM this year in Nashville. So if you're looking for a full week of just data, like head to Nashville and
it's the most exciting week of the year for you, Jamie.
It is.
I was gonna say, Jamie, any chance that the GMH listeners will get a sneak peek for that week while you guys are out? We can cover it on the show, or do we have to be in Nashville to get that?
No, we're going to be putting out a report with it, and high level, and the trend of sort of short-term rentals to hotels, like and no surprise, like it went way up during the pandemic. It did come down, but the overall trend is still going up, of short-term rentals continuing to erode sort of hotel revenue, hotel demand. And what was interesting though is there's this long-term trend line of like there's 1% or 2% a year of short-term rentals getting a bit more of the overall pie of travel revenue. And essentially we reverted back to the trend line in 2022. So
huge spike, kind of fairly
came back
dramatic retraction, and then back to the mean.
Yeah, and a big piece of it is what's going on in the cities. So you think about hotel supply, and it's very much fixed. Like you've got that hotel, like there are only a handful of hotels that permanently closed. And even those, like Times Square Hilton's coming back. It's under new ownership. The old owners took quite a hit on that property, but it is coming back. And if all those hotels could have converted to apartments, they probably would have. In short-term rentals, like it was really easy to do that. So, in most of the major cities, like supply is still off by 50%. And that's meant in the urban areas that hotels are now getting a much greater share of the traveler dollar than pre-pandemic.
Do you see a lot of that supply rejoining the short-term world, or do you think it'll be ages? Or
I think it'll be ages. We've seen, even with demand coming back in these cities, we've seen almost no recovery or no recovery in demand. Occupancy still below 2019 levels, so it's not like it's all concentrating in a smaller 9% of the properties. And with the regulation that's put in place now in a lot of these cities, like it's really hard for supply to leave with new regulation. But it's even harder for new supply to sort of people to make that investment decision with really stringent regulation. So in Boston, in New York, San Francisco, even LA, there has been quite a bit of new regulation put in place, or was put in place right prior to the pandemic, that is really going to sort of impact the rate of recovery in the markets.
And then supply and demand, if there's fewer properties available on short-term rentals in these urban centers, rates go up significantly, which squeezes out kind of your average traveler potentially. Are you seeing rates go up dramatically, or no, not really?
No, and it's because the occupancy still hasn't recovered. So it's occupancy that pushes rates. So if all of a sudden an urban travel comes back really strong, there's half the number of units, like we could see occupancy push up much stronger, and the revenue and opportunity in these urban areas for the existing hosts just become unbelievable, and rate pressure really start to grow. But we haven't started to see that yet.
Interesting. All right, last question of the rapid fire, because I've asked you all this. Is there a significant uptick with properties associated with a national or regional brand, or the single host is just as competitive as the pseudo branded property next door?
Yeah, recent trends have been more, and the growth of supply coming from professional managers compared to individual hosts is definitely skewed towards professional hosts. And a lot of the sort of weight I put towards that is the type of markets that are growing the strongest. So it's mostly sort of coastal mountain destinations where the property managers sort of dominate already. So the fact that we're sort of over-indexing supply to those type of markets, like a Destin, Gatlinburg, Myrtle Beach, that's where the supply is really coming in. And in those markets, and 70-80% of supply is managed by a professional host. So that's where I've seen a lot of the trends. There are some cities, especially in the Southeast, like Atlanta, Phoenix, Houston, Dallas, sort of major cities where supply has been growing really strong. And that actually has a good mix of both individual hosts and some professional managers. But in those cities, it still over-indexes as mostly individuals, people with 1 to sort of 10 to 15 units.
Makes sense, because in theory, that's where they're living and they can operate it themselves locally and not.
Yep.
Managing a property remotely is challenging. And based on my experiences of traveling last week, the owner operators that are right there on site are significantly higher level of detail than your remote groups. So awesome, Jamie. We'll appreciate it. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I'm glad I didn't bet the house.
Coming in.
I was going to comment.
Clutch
I was wondering where this house was that I won.
Just down the road.
That's too good. Well, seriously, Jamie, thanks for hopping on last minute. That comment really sparked a big conversation for our live chat, which was really great. And obviously, there's a lot of data to unpack. So I think we need to get you on again in the future to have you the whole episode, because 25 minutes of Michael and I going back and forth versus the 10 minutes of nuggets that you dropped is, uncomparable for the listeners. So I would love to have you back on the show one day, so we can get into the numbers a little bit deeper, for sure.
Maybe
I'm in Denver all month at AirDNA headquarters. So
great.
Awesome.
I'm in Englewood. I'm like 20 minutes down the road. So maybe let's meet up for cocktail, coffee, one of those two.
Yeah, no, I'm staying in Inglewood, so I bet we're right nearby.
Hey,
perfect. All right, let's do it.
I'll hit you up.
I'll hit you up.
Yeah,
we'll do it live in my studio here if you can see it. But yeah, it'll be great. No, thank you so much, Jamie. And then Michael, any last comments from your end, or you got all your rapid fire questions out of there?
No, I wasn't prepared with rapid fires today because this was out of the blue. But thanks for hopping in, Jamie.
Yeah, Jamie. Seriously. Well, all right, listeners, everyone who's watching live, everyone who is rewatching or re-listening, check us out again next week. We're going to have Jamie back on the show one of these days. And thank you for tuning in.